Hello everyone and welcome to a new video on Aloasis Academia channel. On today's video, we're going to cover a very important concept that many students or researchers they overlook and they don't pay close attention to it. Whether you are a university undergrad student, a master student, a PhD student, or just a researcher who are about to start writing their manuscript, it's very important before you start writing is to plan your academic writing. Some people think that, okay, planning for writing is just getting a paper, writing some ideas on the paper, and that's it. That's wrong, because academic writing, it's a strategy, it's a process that you need to learn, it's a skill that you need to develop. So that's why in this session today, we will go through all the details, and I call it here the writing a blueprint method for your plan of academic writing. So let's start. Okay, let's dive now into planning the academic writing. So one of the very big misconceptions that students have, um, and I will focus on students here, whether you are undergrad student, a master or a PhD, is that they think that writing their assignment or thesis starts by just opening a Word document and then start typing. But that's not quite true, because a good academic writing, it starts literally before that. It's much earlier than that. So I will skim through all the points that you just need to consider before you start writing, and then we will go into a lot of more details later on. So before you start writing, the actual action starts before that, which is what you need to do is, first of all, is to clarify a task. So what am I talking about or writing about? To understand the purpose, why am I writing this assignment? What is it about? What do I need to get out of it? And we will explain later on what questions to use to understand that. Even if you have, for example, a question and you would need maybe to narrow it down. That's very important skill, how to make a broad question into a narrow question, which is going to be easier to write about. If you are a researcher, you might need to create the question. If you are, for example, a PhD student, you're writing a research proposal, then you would need to create a question. And that's also something starts before you start writing, and you need to sort it out before that. Then mapping the structure of the piece of writing that you want to make, because are you writing a literature review, a master thesis, a lab report? Are you writing a systematic review? So these are different types of projects or research, and for each type you would need a specific type of structure when you write. Also organizing the evidence, what papers you're going to include, what papers you're going to exclude. All that happens before you start writing. Okay, then planning the sections, the headings and subheadings of the piece of writing that you want to make. Even that thing, some students, they think we will start writing paragraph by paragraph and we will see how it goes. That's not quite right. The right thing to do is to plan even the sections, the headings and subheadings, and just be ready or be prepared to have an idea of what you're going to write about. This will give you a better cohesion throughout the whole writing. And lastly, setting a realistic timeline, especially for university students who would have like deadlines. And also we have a very important tricks to make sure that you stick to the timeline. A very good analogy that I have is that if you think of building a house, before building a house, we don't just, or if you want to build a house, you don't just lay bricks, on the ground randomly. What you need to do is to have a blueprint or a plan before you start building, and it's the same concept when it when you start writing, because writing a piece of paper or writing a project is like constructing something. So you need to have a clear plan, otherwise everything gonna be messy. I used to be an academic tutor at University of Liverpool, and I can see from experience that many students find it much easier to write paragraph by paragraph rather than just planning out the whole project or the whole piece of writing before they start. This might feels overwhelming when you want to plan ahead, But that's the reason that we're having this video today, is to show you step by step how is it very easy to plan your writing, and this will help you a lot to make everything connected and prevent wasting time when you are writing. Good. So the first thing you need to start with is not starting with writing a sentence, which is most of the students would do. The first thing that you need to do is to start with decisions. Okay. And now we will cover what decisions you need to make to be able to write this plan, this writing and plan for your academic writing. So the first three tasks, or the first 3 points that you need to answer and write down your answers for before you start writing, is the task. You need to be clear, what are you gonna talk about? What exactly am I being asked to do? Are you asked to write a lab report or a literature review or a systematic review? What exactly? So this is very important, because this will focus your thinking into one direction. Then the purpose. Why am I writing it? Am I trying to explain the data or analyze the data? Am I trying to evaluate and compare the data? Because some writing are just descriptive, so you wouldn't need to do much of evaluation and comparisons between papers. So you need to make that very clear to yourself. What is the purpose of the writing or of the assignments I'm doing? And then the question. So we will come later on, just shortly, through a very important tool to break down any research question you have or given by university, and how to um, rephrase it in a way to make it so easy for you to write about. Okay, but the main thing that you need to know is, what central question is this work answering? So that's a very important idea that you need to write down before you start writing. What is the central question I am trying to answer with this with writing this assignment or this thesis? Then it comes the structure. So what structure, what sections will this piece of writing need? And as we said, that's very important, because different types of research would have different sectioning. For example, if you're writing a lab report, you would have a method section. If you're writing a literature review, you wouldn't have a method section. You would just have an introduction and then main body with different themes within the literature review. So that's why you need to understand that. If you don't have an answer for that, that's fine. But this highlights to you that you need to know that. You need to go and read further into what is this assignment about, to be able to answer that question. What sections I will need for this work. Okay, that's why going through these points is very important and essential. And then comes the evidence. So for each section within this piece of writing you are making, or you're writing, so what data you need to collect, what are the sources you're going to be using, primary research, secondary research, what type of information you will support each section with. So that's very important also to know. And then the critical voice. So here comes one of the very important things, and also one of the very, I believe, most difficult things that students find, is critical analysis. So critical analysis within your writing is very essential, and it's very important, and it's usually needed when you write any assignment, whether it's an undergrad assignment or your PhD thesis. So you need to answer this question before you start writing. Where will I compare, evaluate, and interpret? Do I need to make, in which sections I'm gonna be comparing the data or evaluating the data? So you need to decide that also, again, before you start writing. Okay, everything is gonna be draft. Okay, so I'm not saying that if you write something at the stage, it means that's what you're gonna do, but this will just make your pathway very clear, and you will have a very easy and smooth process of writing the whole thing. Okay, you will change stuff throughout the process, but at least you have, as we said, a blueprint to go to use to guide you. Then the last thing is the time. Okay, you need to put a time frame for how long, for example, you're going to be reading papers, for how long you're going to be drafting the work that you are writing. for how long you're going to be writing, refining the references you're going to be adding to the paper that you're writing. Okay, so all that you need to have a draft of the timeline of whatever assignments you need to write about. I know that many students they find planning like they feel that planning or going through this plan is delaying them, but that's not true. Planning is just part of the writing, and you need to understand that if you start writing, and I saw this myself from a lot of students who I tutored, if you start writing without planning, after, for example, writing 500 words, something like that, you will find yourself going back and changing stuff because as you were writing, you came across different ideas, new ideas. So now you want to add these ideas to your research, but now it's too late because you have different, for example, views at the beginning of the paper. So now you need to go back and change that, and then you move on, and so on. You're going to be changing and wasting time by changing stuff that you could have just avoided by a good plan. Okay, so before we dive into the all the techniques now that you need to know to start writing your plan, you just need to familiarize yourself with the common struggles that I found students facing when they are writing, and why do they feel or why do they go through these struggles. Familiarizing yourself with that will help you a lot into avoiding these problems and these mistakes. So one of the very common struggles that students report to me is that saying, I don't know how to start. So at the beginning of their research, they just feel lost. They don't know how to start writing. And this just indicates that the student still hasn't clarified the aim, the question, or the structure of the work that they want to write. So if you ever feel that you don't know how to start writing, then just double check these 3 points, and you will be set to start. Then many students also report to me that they have, for example, feeling that they have read a lot but still feeling lost. And that's also very common. And that's because many students will start reading a lot and a lot of papers, but they do not organize these papers into a specific way to make it easier for them to go back to these papers and extract information from them. And there's a very important technique we will go through to help you organize all the papers that you collect through the process of writing. Many students also report that they feel the writing is messy, and then this is just indicating that they don't have a good plan ahead, and that's what we're trying to build in this video, is to learn how to make this plan to avoid feeling this after writing 1,000 or 2,000 words of your assignments, because that's going to be too late then. Also, many students they state that they feel that they keep repeating themselves in their writing, and then this just indicates that what we mentioned before, that the sections of their writing, they are not clear. They don't have clear purpose. Each section you have within the work that you're writing needs to have a clear job, a clear purpose of what they contain and what message they want to deliver. And that also comes in the planning stage before you start writing. Otherwise, you will write and write, and then you will just exactly what the students reported. They just feel repeating themselves. In literature reviews, for example, and that's also true for other type of papers, many students they feel that the writing is descriptive, and that's one of the very most common struggles that students report. Because to avoid this struggle or to solve this issue, is that they need to be able to critically analyze the data and the sources and the papers that they have collected and included in their paper. Okay, and as we said, on my channel you will have a whole video on critical analysis to be able to use it in your writing. So a last message maybe I would give to you before we start going into the real work is that many students they feel that writing an assignment, when they tell them, for example, you have a literature review of 5,000 words, you need to write it, they just feel it's impossible to write. Usually, and most of the time, language isn't the problem, but the problem is that they don't have a clear plan. It's exactly as if someone asks you to build a house and you just start throwing bricks randomly, but you don't have a plan. How can you build that house? How can you build that um, uh, piece of writing without having a clear plan? So I hope at this stage now you understand the importance of planning and the importance of having a um, writing a blueprint before you start writing your assignment. So the first step in planning is to have the questions that you of the research that you want to write. So here I just have an example saying that a university gave you a question to write a literature review on, for example. But this is true for example, let's say that you have your master thesis question or PhD thesis question, or maybe a research question that you made an experiment on, and now you want to start writing your manuscript. So just make sure that you write the question very clearly in front of you. So once the question, so in this example, let's say that the university gave you this question: how physical activity affects blood glucose control in people with type 2 diabetes. So that's the question that you need to write a literature review on. What you need to do first is just think and write down what what you believe you would need to search for to answer this question. Okay, once you write down these points, this is going to be the foundation of the different themes and the different sections that you would have in your paper. So for example, to answer this question, I would need to search for evidence regarding mechanisms. What mechanisms of, for example, blood glucose control? Okay, what mechanisms involved in developing type 2 diabetes? So these mechanisms, I would need to know them and talk about them in my research to be able to answer this question. Benefits. So what are the benefits of physical activities on controlling blood glucose levels? So I would need to search for papers that talk about benefits. Okay. For example, limitations. Is physical activities a considered to be a cure for type 2 diabetes or not? Or just it will help people with type 2 diabetes to control their blood glucose, but maybe medication is needed. So it has maybe some limitations. So it's not the cure for type 2 diabetes, and so on. And so this can be applied for any questions you have. Okay, no matter what question you have, just write down the question in front of yourself and on a piece of paper, and then just start writing down what you believe you need to search for to be able to answer the question. At this stage, do not paraphrase the question, just keep it as it is, and just write down as many ideas and as many informations you just think of as possible. Once you do that, now we go to the second step, which is learning the skill of how to break down the question you have into smaller parts, which makes it easier for you to digest and will make the question much clearer to you so you can answer it in a much better way. So you need to know that most research questions, they contain hidden components that they wouldn't be clear to you unless you use a specific tools or strategies to make these components very visible to you. So for most health and medical and scientific topics, there is a very useful framework. It's called the PICO framework. And for the vast majority of questions in this field, they will fulfill the PICO framework. They need to fulfill the PICO framework. So what is the PICO framework? So it's an abbreviation, and each letter will mean something. Okay, so that's the question we have: how physical activities affects blood glucose control in people with type 2 diabetes. So let's see how this question that was given by the university fulfills the PICO framework. So first of all, P stands for population. So does this question um, states the population that the research is trying to study? Yes, so the population is people with type 2 diabetes. So P is fulfilled. Then it comes the I. The I stands for the intervention. So does the question mention any type of interventions for this research? And the answer is yes, because they mentioned that they will have physical activity. So that's the intervention that they are trying to study in this research. So now, if you just focus, you will feel that the question is becoming clearer. Then C is the comparator. Do we have in the question any mention of any comparisons? So that's the answer is no, we don't have. So the question just say, what's the effect of physical activity on blood glucose control? And here it comes the importance of the PICO framework for you when you start writing, because even though the question doesn't state any comparator, you need to write about it in the thesis. So if you think, what comparisons can I make in the writing, which is easy, which is you're going to compare people with physical activity and compare to people who do not exercise or with lower physical activity, for example. So how different levels of physical activities will affect the control of blood glucose. So as we say, as I said before, this might not be mentioned in the question, but using the PICO framework, it's clear to you now that this addition is important and will make your writing much clearer. And then the outcome. Does the question state or mention any outcome we are looking to measure? So the answer is yes, which is blood glucose control. So in this way, now we have a very clear, we broke down the question, which was just a few sentences, into different sections, and now it's much clearer. So now you can paraphrase the question into a much clearer version that makes it easier for you to answer when you start writing. So maybe a paraphrase, that's just an example, you can paraphrase it in different ways, but an example of paraphrasing this question is that we're trying to answer, in adults with type 2 diabetes, how does physical activity compared with lower or no activity affect blood glucose control? So this paraphrasing the question will help you to have a very good plan of your writing, and also you will have a very good thesis or a piece of writing at the end after you write everything, because now you have a clear question. And that's one of the very important points we mentioned before, which is defining the task. What are we gonna talk about? What this research is about? So the PICO framework is one of the essential skills that you need to develop. So once you become familiar with the PICO framework and you paraphrase the question, and now you have a good understanding and good break of the question. So now you need to define the keywords that you have in the question, and that's very important step when it comes to planning for your writing. So before searching on papers, before start writing, just define the keywords of the question. So have the question, the original question you had from the university in front of you, read it, and then make sure that you know or highlight the keywords within that question. So the first keywords in this question, the first keyword in this question is physical activity. So what is physical activity? If you find yourself, for example, and again, this applies for any type of questions, okay, any other questions. This is just a general example. So if you find that, okay, that keyword, I have nothing on. I don't know anything. So you can't write anything on. Then this means and indicates that you do not understand that keyword. So you would need at this point to go and do some further studies on that keyword, just understand it, understand what it is, and then come back and write some few points on that. So for example, physical activity, what things we can write. Just make sure, write few things to make sure that you know what this thing is about. So physical activity, it means any body movement that uses energy. They include different types: walking, housework, cycling, gardening, etc. Okay, so just writing 1 or 2 points, making sure you can define the keyword and you understand what it is, that's enough. The second keyword, blood glucose control. Do you know what is blood glucose? Or for example, how will the body keeps blood sugar at a healthy level? What are the common measures used to measure whether blood glucose is at healthy level or not? So all these questions, you can write them down just to make sure that you know what this keyword is about. You know, you can define it, you can ask some question on it. If you find that you have no idea whatsoever about blood glucose, you've never heard of blood glucose before, then this means that you need to go now, before you continue planning for your writing, you need to go and start writing, start doing some further studies on blood glucose. Just understand it very briefly. What is blood glucose? How is it measured? Things like that. So this will help you then with coming up with and structuring your whole thesis or your whole assignment. The third keyword we have in this question is type 2 diabetes. Okay, so again, you just make sure that you can define what type 2 diabetes is. So, which is a condition where blood sugar becomes too high because the body doesn't use insulin properly. Okay, we know that there's another type called type 1 diabetes, and that's a different type. Okay, and we shouldn't be including or talking about in this question because this question clearly asks about type 2 diabetes. So I hope now you can see how identifying the keywords and making sure that you understand and be able to define each of these keywords is very essential for you to plan your writing. Because if any of these keywords is you are unfamiliar with, then this will really reduce your progress and you will not be able to write a very good plan for that. Now we get to the second or to the fourth step, which is inclusion and exclusion criteria. So here you need to be clear what papers you're going to include in your writing and what papers you're going to exclude from your research. So you can have a very simple table like that, and then you write all the criteria that if a paper has, you will include that paper, and if the paper doesn't have, then you will exclude the paper. So the first thing, if a paper talks about adults with type 2 diabetes, that's good because now that you have broken down your question and understood all the keywords within a question, so you understand clearly what you're trying to answer now. Okay, so if you feel that at this stage you still don't know what the question is really asking you, then you would need to go back and go through all the steps we just been through and make sure that you understand all the points. Because at this stage, before you start making your inclusion and exclusion criteria, you need to have a very good understanding of the questions that you need to answer. Okay, so for inclusion criteria, you would include any paper that is about type 2 diabetes, including exercise or studying the effect of exercise or physical activity on type 2 diabetes. Even if studies are measuring blood glucose sugar and in type 2 diabetes people. And also, for example, you would include any papers that are from academic sources. So this indicates that if a paper is on type 1 diabetes only, then you're going to exclude that paper when you are making your search. If you are searching and came across papers that are only studying the effect of diets on blood sugar control, then you're gonna exclude that paper because your main the question is clearly asking about physical activity and not diet. Then if this study you came across is not measuring blood glucose levels or not studying how blood glucose is controlled, then again this is an exclusion criteria. It means that the paper you're going to exclude because it's very clear in your question that you need to understand how physical activity is affecting blood sugar. Okay, and for the academic resources, so non-academic resources, like for example Wikipedia, you cannot include Wikipedia, or for example any uh, very informal blogs or websites that are not academic. Usually in these papers and in these assignments you would need articles, you would need papers that are published by journals. You don't just go to websites and get information from that. So any information from non-academic websites you will just exclude and you will not add it to your references. So this is very important. And this matters because your review needs to be controlled, okay? Why inclusion exclusion criteria is very important to build before you start writing is because otherwise your whole writing will be messy. Okay, you need to have a very rigid and robust criteria for what paper you're going to include and what paper you're going to exclude. Okay, and that's very important. You're not just collecting random papers, because as what you have done so far is that you read the question, you broke it down, you used the pico framework to understand it very clearly. So you're not just collecting random papers to answer the question. Now you know exactly what the question is asking, and you will collect very specific papers to answer that question specifically. Okay, so you need, or you are deciding what evidence is relevant to answering the question. And you wouldn't be able to do any of that or coming up with any of these criteria if you do not understand your question correctly. So that's why the earlier steps, the PICO framework, the understanding the keywords, they are very essential to be able to come up with this criteria and then to have a full writing plan before you start writing. So now that you have understood the question, broke it down, came up with and highlighted all the keywords in the question, um, and also understanding and coming up with an inclusion and exclusion criteria. So all that is set now. What you need to do now is to go on the internet and start making your search. Start trying to find the papers that you will use to start writing on and answer the question that you're the assignment question, for example. So to be able to search for papers, you need to build a search strategy. So it's not something random. If you just go to Google Scholar or any other databases, and in the search bar, you just write exercise and diabetes, this is going to be too broad and messy, and you will get like hundreds or maybe even thousands of papers. So it's that are not very specific to answer your question. So using the right keywords when searching on the databases is very essential to get only the relevant papers. So you don't waste your time reading papers that are not relevant, and at the same time, you will have a very high quality papers. So to do that, you need to be familiar with something called Boolean operators. Okay, so what are Boolean operators? So Boolean operators are just three main words, okay? And, or, not. So these three words you're going to be using to make your search and find the literature search and find the papers you need for your writing. So when you use the word and, it means you want to narrow down the search. What does that mean? So in the search bar in Google Scholar or in other databases, you would write diabetes and exercise and blood sugar. This means that the system or the database will bring to you all the papers that has mentioned diabetes and exercise and blood sugar. So you wouldn't have results of papers that were just on exercise, or they were just studying diabetes without connecting it to exercise or blood sugar. So using the word and between these three keywords, this will narrow down your search and will give you very specific papers that are relevant to answering your question. You wouldn't be able to come up with these keywords unless you understand the question very clearly. That's why the previous steps, they are very important to be done in the right order, in the order I showed in this video, to be able to come up with these specific keywords. When you use the word or, here it means you want to broaden the search, okay? So for example, you would write blood sugar or blood glucose. This means that all the papers that mentioned blood sugar or any paper that mentioned blood glucose, they will come up in your search, okay? And then not. So not is used when you want to exclude any paper that has a specific word. So you would write diabetes, not type 1 diabetes. So this will come up with all papers that talk about diabetes, but they will exclude any paper that mention type 1 diabetes. And that's very important because in your question you are concerned or interested in studying type 2 diabetes and not type 1 diabetes. Usually for health, medical, and scientific topics, there are different search engines and databases that are used to find papers on. I will just mention here very quickly a few of them. So this will help you to find some papers. So for example, PubMed and Cochrane Library, they are very excellent in finding papers. Google Scholar and Scopus or Web of Science, again, they are very excellent for finding a lot of papers. And in the search bar of any of these, you just use the Boolean operators with the keywords that you came up with, and you will find a lot of papers that are helpful, and you'll start reading and scan through the papers and start planning. So all that is very important at the planning stage, planning what keywords you're going to use. This will save you a lot of time instead of just using exercise in diabetes, and then you just get a very broad results that are messy and will waste you a lot of time. Okay, so now we get to creating a skeleton outline for the paper that you want to write or the assignment, and that's one of the final steps that you need to do. So before we go through that, please, if you find this video helpful, try to support the channel by like, comment, share, and subscribe. That really helped me and encourages me to continue doing this video. Thank you. So if we go back to the skeleton, so you can have something rough like that, okay? So each section within the paper that you want to write or the assignment, you need to give it a specific purpose, okay? So the introduction, you need to introduce the topic, the problem, and the aim that you need to achieve by writing this assignment. Then the background, which is just explaining the key concept, what's blood glucose, what's physical activities, what is type 2 diabetes, things like that. Then you need to talk about, you break down the main body of the paper into different themes. So for example, in one theme you discuss major first ideas and then discuss a secondary idea then. Okay, so you need to have, as we said before, headings and subheadings, and each section would need to talk about a specific idea. Then critical discussion. You need to show some critical analysis by comparing evidence, highlighting limitations and gaps within the research. And finally, you go through conclusions, which is trying to answer questions and show the implication of the research or the paper that you're trying to write. So this is a very rough outline that it can be different to your research, but this is just to get an idea. And the main idea that I want to deliver here is that each section in your outline needs to have a specific purpose. In the past, when students came to me and they were frustrated that they felt lost and they felt that their writing is messy and they are just repeating themselves. So I found that the main problem is that they don't have or they didn't assign a specific purpose or a specific job for each section. That's why it's very important to write for each section what you need this section to do, what's the job and what's the purpose of that section. This will give you a very clear outline and will make your writing very smooth. So once you write down the outline and everything is settled, there's another important thing that you need to make, which is something called evidence bank. So the evidence bank is just a table, okay, where you organize the sources that you found, all the papers that you find, okay, before writing. And that's very important. I really wish someone told me this before doing my master and PhD thesis, because this will give you a high level of organization when you are trying to find information in papers that you have read. So the table will look something like that. Okay, so for example, a source, study A, write the reference of the paper here. Then you write just briefly what's the main points mentioned in that paper. What's the strength of the paper? For example, if the paper has a large sample, for example. If the paper has any obvious limitation, for example, looked at only one physical activity. Okay, they didn't look at multiple things. This is just specific for the example we gave. And once you have all this information, you just write where you think this paper will be used, in which section of the writing of the assignment or the paper that you're writing, this paper will be included. Okay. Then you have a second paper. Again, what are the main points? What are the strength, the limitation, and then whether they're going to be in a different section or in the same section. So after having 100, for example, reference, or maybe in a PhD thesis, you might have 200 or 300 references. Having this table having this table will make it much easier for you to search for papers, to find papers that you, for example, read 2 years ago at the beginning of your PhD, and now you're trying to find that paper with that information, but you just can't find it on internet. So if you have this document, you will just write down and try to find, for example, specific keywords, and then you will go straight to the paper that you're looking for. You can add more columns to this table, of course, and for example, adding the dates, things like that. But just having a table like that will make your life much easier when writing when having a lot of papers to write about. I really can't emphasize anymore how much important is it to give each section or theme a purpose or a job. Because one of the common struggles that students have is that they would say students will create different headings and subheadings, but the section do not have clear function. They don't know what they're going to write about, even if they did the plan, but they didn't write what each section is going to be about, what's the purpose of each section, and why it is difficult, and why the struggle the students has the struggle is because a heading names the topics. For example, saying, okay, this heading going to be about type 2 diabetes, but that doesn't mean automatically explain why this section is here. What are you gonna, for example, talk about in type 2 diabetes? Is it how the onset of it, the genetic of it, the complications of it? So all these could go into different subheadings and headings. That's why just writing a heading in your plan, it's not enough. And I see it from students. They are struggling by just writing the headings. So the solution is simple. Just under each section or under each heading, write one or two jobs as a sentences. Okay. So for example, you have a heading, barriers to academic writing. Okay. So that's a heading. But the job of this section, you wanted to be that this section explains main difficulty students face before discussing how writing support may address them. Okay, so that's very important. Try to write the job for each section. I cannot emphasize anymore how important is that. The last skill that you can learn in this in today's lesson is planning backwards. Okay, and the benefit of that is that students usually underestimate how long writing it could take. Okay, they treat writing as one task, but it's actually several tasks. It's not, as we mentioned through this video, and we now know that writing is multiple tasks. It's not just one task. Okay, so instead of just plan your writing and your timeline um, forward, you do it backward. So which means from the deadline, and you're going backward until the first task you did, which is reading the papers. Okay, this way will help you to meet the deadline at at the right time, because the problem is that the students think that the deadline is when they finish writing, but that's not true. Deadline is not when you finish writing. The deadline is when you drafted all your writing, you polished it, and now it's ready to be submitted. Okay, and there is a lot of different steps. So for example, you might write the first draft, but you still need a feedback from, for example, a supervisor. Then you revise the feedback you got from the supervisor. Then you go through the referencing and so on. So the deadline is not when you finish writing, which is first or second draft, is when you polish everything, the references, the arguments, the structure, the word count, the font line, all these small details that universities usually ask for when you're writing an assignment. That's when the deadline is when you all that is done and now you need to submit it. So use this backward plan, will help you a lot. Okay, the take-home points for this lesson is that planning is not separate from writing. It's actually essential part of writing. So you need to plan out your writing before you start. Literature review planning is not is an argument planning. Okay, so it's not you're just planning for writing a descriptive analysis of what these papers found, but you're actually building an argument and comparing the papers to one another. The best structure is often discovered through revision. So do not expect that your first draft is going to be the best draft, okay? You would go through multiple drafts until you get the best structure of your paper. Having a plan beforehand will help you a lot and save you a lot of time. The introduction is often easier to finalize later, okay? So make sure that you draft an introduction at the beginning to make sure that you understand all the concepts related to the question, but just be aware that the introduction is going to be finalized later on. Finally, critical writing must be designed. Okay, and again, that's a big topic. We're going to include it in a different video, but you need to understand what critical writing is and how to use it in your writing. And by that, we reach to the end of this video. Please, if you find it helpful, please support the channel by liking, comment, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Thank you, and see you in a different video.